to A Well-Designed Business. My name is LuAnn, and I'm so glad you found this podcast. Together with my husband Vince and our partner Bill, we have grown our company WindowWorks from the ground up. So I know and I understand the challenges you face in running your interior design business. I also know that your talent alone isn't enough to ensure your success. So on this podcast, we talk about strategies and practical steps to help you grow your business. But make no mistake about it, we have our share of fun here too, mixed in with those aha moments that I love so much. This isn't fluff. Nobody has time for that. Whether you are a new interior designer or a seasoned designer, I am here to help you create and to manage the kind of interior design firm that you dream of. It's straight talk and it's action. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, welcome to A Well-Designed Business. My guest today is Nina Parvaresh, founder and principal of Concept Me, and she is quite simply the definition of a go-getter. After training as an architect in Paris, Nina began her career at the age of 23 by jumping feet first into a full-scale design project in the Middle East, working primarily in Saudi Arabia and Dubai. Nina has faced many unique challenges, including working in a male-dominated space, in a male-dominated part of the globe, taking on projects for powerful families in the Middle East, and navigating cultural differences as she worked in the various parts of the world. And yet, in many ways, Nina struggles with the same exact things that all entrepreneurs do, trying to break away from the grind to focus on becoming the CEO. Today, she's here to talk about the unique aspects of global design work, the importance of knowing your clients and understanding the market, and how she hopes to grow her firm. And if you are struggling in any of the ways with the same challenges Nina, try to find the time to free up your time so you can be the visionary in your business. Our show sponsor, MyDoma Studio, is your complete designer toolkit, and this might be exactly what you need. MyDoma makes it easy to streamline your processes, track your projects, communicate with clients and vendors, and get you organized. It's created by designers for designers, specifically to address what you need as a business owner. MyDoma Studio makes it easy to increase your productivity and give you more valuable time in your business. You can get 20% off your first 3 months by going to mydomastudio.com/a well-designed business. That will also be in the show notes. Now, let's hear what Nina has to share about launching a full-service global design and architecture brand. Hey, Nina, thanks so much for joining me on A Well-Designed Business today.
Hi, LuAnn. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Nina, today I want to focus on, there's a couple of things in your journey in being a interior design business owner that stand out to me. Number one, you are international for us, and I love learning about design in other parts of the world. So, but I also noticed in your background as I was reading about you that you started out as an architect.
Correct.
Not only is architecture somewhat male-dominated across, the U.S., but I would think that in Dubai and in different places like that, it's very male-dominated. So tell me about this experience, and maybe, I don't often ask people why did they become something, but what drove you to architecture, knowing that this was going to be a factor for you?
Sure. So, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's a very male-dominated, industry. I think even in France. So I was born and raised in France. I'm originally Iranian, and I always knew, I think from the age of 2, 3, that I'm going to be an architect. So, when you're at school and your teachers ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? So as long as I can remember, it was written architect. I was a dictator when it came to my parents' house into organizing from the age of like 6, 7. So for me, it was a very, natural path, so I very naturally, applied to all the exams to get into the best architecture school in Paris, and I was really hesitant between interior and architecture. And I think a lot of students finishing high school might not know interior design, architecture, urban design. And then so I decided to go for the bigger scale, thinking that if I go to the bigger scale, then the smaller scale might be easier for me to understand, so I decided to do that. So after studying architecture for 6 years and a half in France, which is like long studies where you don't sleep for 6 years, 2008 worldwide crisis. Honestly, there was no jobs in France. I mean, there was jobs in France, but I always knew that I would not see myself in a typical agency working 80 hours a week. And I always knew that for me, I felt deeply as a creative, but also as an entrepreneur. So at the time, I mean, the US is very different into the mindset, but Europe is still quite conservative when it comes to being young, motivated, and wanting to start your own business. So I knew I wouldn't be able to stay in Europe, and I had an opportunity to move to the Middle East, which was pretty much, like a blank canvas at the time. And you had the chance as a 22, 23 years old to prove yourself, So I
Ah.
moved to the Middle East, which was even more a male oriented, industry where, so I actually moved to Saudi Arabia in 2008 because I had the chance to go teach the first batch of female architects that were graduating for the first time in 2008, the first 9 women that were graduating in architecture. And I was meant to go there for 4 months to teach them a semester. A
Mm.
semester turned into a lifetime in the Middle East, basically. And I realized very quickly that at 22, 23, I would be able to sign on a big project, So I stayed, and in this very male dominated industry, which, surprisingly, and often I'm asked this question, it only served me, so I
Mm.
didn't really face, misogyny, or in fact, being a woman was almost being an alien in the whole scene, right? So people would remember me, and people were like, oh, that's the French architect that just moved here, so it's like I was exotic, basically. I was exotic, and it was really not seen. And this is how I literally, signed my first project at the age of 23, which was, basically 50,000 square feet residential project for a very big industrial family. I can tell you, I cried for a year of that project every day, because you went from school to, being thrown on designing such a big property. And so I got in from the contractor, that was a British contractor established, there for the past 30 years. And so, yeah, this is how I started. But really, being, in fact, in a male dominated industry never really was never a big con for me. In fact, like, it always helped me. And I feel when I look at the European market or other markets, you can feel being a woman, and you can feel it sometimes as a negative way. Right now we have projects in the Middle East, but also in Italy. And I can clearly see the difference in Italy, where, you can feel a bit of the misogyny, like you can feel, and I have a team of dominant women, in the team. So the architects, the designer, the PM. So, it's hard when you have a team of men, big teams of men, from MEP to structure, and then a woman, which is much younger, is basically their boss, So you have to have a strong personality, I guess, and, shuffle between being soft, but very also strict, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, we're 5 minutes in, and I'm pretty sure I recognize that you do have a strong personality, right? Serves you well. The confidence comes through,
You
right?
you have
Yeah.
to. I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, I think when I have younger people that talk to me, it's like, we want to open a design office. What do you recommend? And I'm like, just try. Like, you
I
have to be
recommend you
a,
do it.
yeah, like,
Right.
you just have to take on risks. And I also think when you're young, there are risks that you're taking, and you don't realize how much of a risk it is. You just say yes, and then you do it. I remember my first project in Dubai. We didn't even have a license to do this project, and I remember the client telling me, are you able to do that? Without thinking, I said yes. So I said yes, and then I decided to sort out how to do it legally. So
Yeah, yeah.
so yeah.
Oh my god, that reminds me, we had a guest on a couple of years ago Lori Morris, who is a very high end luxury designer. I want to say she's in Canada, but I wouldn't
Okay.
swear to it. I can
Okay.
picture her and her firm, and her photos are amazing. And the literally entire interview, she's like, when the client asks if you can do this, the answer is yes. The client asks, can you do this? The answer is yes. She goes, go figure it out and figure out
Yeah.
how to charge for
Yeah.
it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
it's also, I think after 15 years, I wouldn't agree so much if the client says, just do it, because I've learned also after 15 years to put boundaries. And I think this
Yes.
is very important in this industry. And as a business owner, to learn putting boundaries. Initially, the first like 6, 7 years of the business, like I would say yes to everything. So, you don't yet have an identity as a design office. So we would take on commercial project, residential project, but
Mm,
it served us so much because I feel the curve of learning and the way you develop is insane. Like 2 years ago, we had our 15 years reunion with my architecture school in Paris, and I could feel, like, and yourself, you don't realize that you evolve, that your skills are evolving. You never realize where you're at unless you see it in somebody else's eyes, right? So for me, the
yes.
past 2 years, I've seen it twice. Once in that school reunion, and once, a year and a half ago when we started having projects back in Europe, where I'm from. I realized it, like seeing the reaction of our contractors and suppliers, because we were issuing our design and our drawings, and they would see how much knowledgeable we were in topics that your typical designer would not have that knowledge, but we had to develop those skills because there is a real gap in the Middle East, right? So it's like, let's talk, I don't know, automation system. The
Mm,
typical architect in or interior designer in France, in Italy, would not know the detail of an automation system, or like will not go in depth into electrical system or plumbing system. Like, our job is to be more creative, right? Even though we have
okay.
technical skills, but we realize that we've developed those skills by default because we really had to understand them ourselves to make sure to guide the people here correctly. So
Right.
you have a lot of specialized people in Europe, in the US. Here, that's not so much the case. People call
Okay.
themselves general contractors, and you just go with the flow and you learn, on the ground. So when you are very detail oriented and when you are very strict with yourself, and your clients are the two let's say the 2% high net worth individual that have traveled all over the world, they will not miss out on something, on a corner, on a
Right.
system. So you have to learn that yourself, so there's no place for mistake.
Right. So a couple of things I want to pull apart in there. So I'll start at the end right there
Sure.
because I just think that's interesting. When your clients are the top
Yeah.
2% high
Yeah.
net worth individuals, you said something that I have said on the podcast
Yeah.
over and over
Yeah.
again. You're the expert. Don't save my money for me. That's what I say. Don't save your clients money. I know that it even is even more prevalent at that level, because to what you just said, it's not good enough that you don't know automation. That client, even if they haven't heard of
Yeah.
automation yet, they're going to. And if
Yes.
you're not the one that says, hey, let's think about doing a home automation system, or God forbid, you probably wouldn't get so far as to not put home automation in 2024. But
Yeah.
if there's something else that you don't suggest, and the first one of their top 2% people walks in and says, how come you didn't get this
Yeah.
in your house?
Yeah.
It is not like,
Yeah.
oh, next time. It's
Yeah.
like a
Yeah.
big
So
deal, right?
you have to be up to date, and like the reality is you have to surround yourself with the right partners. And I think the field we're in is all about teamwork.
Yeah.
This is not a job you can do individually, and you need to be able to count on people. And as the year go by, like, you need to be able to surround yourself with experts that are better than you. So I always say, as the year go by and as we develop as a design office, I just want to work with people that are better than I am, because I want to learn from them, right? So last year we spent, 2 years working on a very big palace in Saudi Arabia for one of the big industrial families, and we spent a year producing moldings with a company in France that does, Versailles Castle and all the historical castle. But I learned so much through that, because you're talking people that are historical houses that are so specialized in that craft, but it's a luxury and it's a pleasure to have the budgets to work with those
Yes.
people. But
Yeah.
of course it wasn't always like that. But as you
Right.
said, those clients travel all over the world. There are people that they might not know, that X automation system is the best, and they might not know the
Right.
latest. But when those clients go in the best hotels in the world, right? So
That's right.
they will press a button and they expect all of this to happen. So the level of requirement of those people is, for me, unprecedented. Like, we have to be in their brain. And I always say I feel more like a psychologist than an architect at times, because you have to be ahead of their demands, and you have to
Right.
really, you know s- wonder, what would that person want, and
Yeah, because if they feel
yeah,
like they're the one consistently bringing it up to you, they
yeah,
start to wonder, what do I need you for?
yeah,
Right?
of
Even
course,
though there's 1,000 other things you do other
yeah,
than just bring the ideas, but that's the small, narrow focus that they might have. And to your point, they're visiting palaces around the world.
yeah,
They're visiting the highest, that they're not visiting the rooms that are 400 a night. They're visiting the
yeah.
rooms in the hotels that are
For
40,000 a night.
exactly. And they have friends, right? So, and their friends are people like them, right? So it's,
Yes,
if they
yes.
don't see it in this, they will see it and they
That's
would be
right.
like, why
How
isn't
come
this
I
the,
don't have
yeah, yeah.
it?
And yeah, they're usually very educated people. And again, as the years are going by, I feel our clientele gets kind of higher and higher, and that's the goal,
More
right?
up
And
leveled, yes.
and also, usually this type of profile are quite control freaks. There are people that
Yes, they didn't get there
that
by accident.
yeah, I mean, they didn't get there by accident. There are people that are CEO or owners of huge corporations. There are people that fly their own planes,
That's
and
right.
so, but they still care about picking up a fabric. So it's, how do you do that? You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
challenging.
Yeah. So one of the other things that I wanted to go back and because you went right by it, like 23 years old, a minute out of school, and your
Yeah,
first project is a
yeah,
50,000 square foot home. I
yeah.
mean, you didn't even have a team yet. So, like,
No.
how did you manage it?
I mean,
First of all, high
yeah.
five for saying yes, okay, and just
Yeah, I
being
mean,
like, I'll figure it out. But that's a pretty significant project there,
I mean,
just to
LuAnn,
manage
just
it.
to make you laugh, we designed the first project, the first draft. I went to the contractor and he's like, "Excuse me, where are all the socket outlets?" We just had come out of school, like, you don't learn about switches and socket, at least in France, in France, schools of designs are very theoretical, they teach you to
Oh,
think. They're not
oh,
giving you those technical skills because they consider France is a very theoretical, philosophical country, right? Where they care about aesthetics and concepts,
yes.
and the way you think is more important than learning how to build a wall. But
Yeah, they
then
figure you'll
here we
figure that
go.
out somewhere else.
Yeah. So basically 2008, 2009, most of my friends who graduated, with me don't have a job, because again, 2008, 2009. So I literally take my phone, I sign the project for a ridiculous price. You don't know how to price at the time, right? I mean, I charged $70,000 to do this property. I'll never forget, but for me,
Oh
it's
my
just, but
gosh.
it paid me and my team for the year. You know what I
Well,
mean?
and
So
that's the thing. It's at the same time you know now how
yeah,
ridiculously low
yeah,
it is,
of
but at the
course.
same time at 23 just graduating,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
okay, there's our year's salary for me and all my buddies.
Yeah, exactly. So, I had half of my friends that were not working. I called them and I'm like, guys, I'll pay you, $500 a week. Are you in? So we worked like insane people day and night. And I'm
Oh,
telling you, like, I was leaving the contractor's office on a daily basis in tears because,
oh,
but it really taught me because they were British contractors in the Middle East. They were part of the top five best contractors, and very, very strict, like British school, old school, still doing drawings by hand. So for us, it was, and I realized nobody else was like them after that, but it taught
mm,
us to be so detail oriented, to care about every single corner. Their execution was impeccable, so
Mm.
it was a lot of it was a huge learning experience and very positive, and from those clients, then we ended up doing the project for the whole family, because this was
Whoa.
the eldest brother. And those are large industrial family. There is a cousin,
Yeah.
there is a sister, there is a brother. 15 years down the line, we're finishing the youngest sister villa. You know what I mean? So
Wow.
it's
Wow. You were
it
able to raise your rates along the years, though.
yeah, I mean, you would hope so, no? But that's not easy. Like, again,
Mm,
for us in France, we did not
mm,
have a class or any learning on how to price projects. So it was literally
mm.
me going on Google and trying to understand, first of all, what are even the step of the project, like just
Right.
from that basic understanding of what do you do, to submit a full-on project from A to Z. So it's a lot of, again, learning on the ground. So we've done so much mistakes, but I can say, like, I learned the hard way by doing
Yeah.
mistakes. Nobody was
Yeah.
there to tell me do it this way, do it this way. But somehow then we became better at it, because believe me, when you do two mistakes, you're not going to
Yeah.
do a third mistake,
No.
because
It's
I'm
hard.
like, when I priced twice wrong, and I'm like, how the hell am I going to pay the salaries? You realize that,
Yes.
no, that's the wrong pricing. I still feel I underprice, so it's just it's a continuous challenge, right? Because your team gets better, so of course, like, your overheads gets higher, and so it's a snowball effect, right? So
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm also curious, was it had to be like a networking thing? Like, who would recommend a 50,000 square foot project to a
I mean,
twenty-three-year-old?
LuAnn, this is how, at the time in 2008 in Saudi Arabia, it was really a black canvas of design, and there was a huge lack
Oh,
of supplies of architects.
of the
So so
you. Yeah.
I arrived there way before. So the Middle East really opened, like Saudi Arabia really opened the past, like, 5 6 years. But when I
Okay.
was there in 2000, when I went there in 2008 2009, I was the only woman in the plane. I'll never forget when I was doing round trip between Paris and Saudi, or between Dubai and Saudi. I was the only woman in the plane. So it's,
Whoa.
until the age of 30, I always had, like, customs at the airport stopping me, because they couldn't understand what a single woman written CEO on her residency was doing there. It was very, very unseen. So I was really an alien. So I had to kind of develop that attitude. And then, when it started to become too difficult to hire the right teams there, this is when I also opened the office in Dubai. But yeah, it's there was no supply of resources. So the
That's
contractor,
crazy.
so those clients had hired a team in London. They had actually hired a team in LA, and all of those people, and you're talking, they had paid already, probably. I had billed $70,000, but I remember seeing fees of the LA office, which was $1 million. So those people had already, when I came into the picture on my first project, had tried 3 times to design their homes. But there is such a big gap between the understanding of an office in London or in LA and the reality on the ground in the Middle East. So I
Yes.
think, if unless you're really here and deeply understand the market and deeply understand the client, it was not working. So they ended up putting in the trash, those $1 million in design fees. And we came in, and I'll never forget, like, of course, the way I convinced them was not by billing them initially. The contractor introduced me, and I was very naive because I didn't know who those people were. Like, I was 23, but they were one of the most important industrial family in the region. So
Whoa.
it's I met them, and I said, from my 23-year-old French ethics, the designs that you had until now are disastrous. Like, I literally said that. I thought they were disastrous. You know what, like, very often, unfortunately, a lot of outsider office design offices from the US, from London, with all due respect, do not know the market, and see
Right.
them,
Of course.
yeah,
I
and
could
see
see
the
how that
Middle
would be a
East,
disconnect.
a bit as, the a golden cave, where they're going
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
able to make a lot of money with very wealthy people. But then, I don't know what's a project worth if you don't execute it. So a lot of
Right.
time it stays on paper, because it's just not realistic what's being designed.
Mm.
against the market capabilities, right? So I went to the client and said, give me 2 weeks. Me and my team are going to give you a proposal, like a design. I
Me
don't
and my
want anything.
fantasy team that I have
Yeah.
to gather up as soon as I walk out of this office.
Yeah. So I called my friends and I'm like, and at the time I was teaching at the university and it was my first salary. And I called my friends and I said, I'll pay you each $200 a week, which was nothing, but this is all I had. And I said, guys, let's do that. And if we do that, I'll hire you for the next year. So after we didn't sleep for 10 days. And I remember the client had a 20-seater dining table. I filled at the time the 20-seater dining table was A3 board. At the time, we were still printing boards. And they were like, wow, they realized that in 2 weeks, without asking for any money, we had done more than the London office that had built like $1 million. So,
Whoa.
yeah.
Whoa.
So this is
That's
how we
awesome.
started. Yeah.
It's a testament to having to have your intuition, your gut instincts moving with you
Yeah.
because
So
there's so
important.
many times we're saying, oh, don't do a stick of design work, don't put a pen to paper, don't put a pencil to anything until
Yeah.
you get paid. But
Yeah.
for the most part, I would say that is
Yeah.
probably a very true
Yeah.
and good advice statement.
Yeah.
But there are just times when you just know it in your bones that you've got to do the extra above and beyond
Of
to make
course.
the impression,
Yeah.
right? It's there's a difference between going for it and risking
Yeah.
and laying down and just doing something for free that somebody,
Yeah,
what I'm
of
right? Would you
course, of
agree?
course.
Right?
Like I would say to any newcomer or any like young designer, I 100% believe in intuition because at the end of the day, you're dealing with human beings, right? So
Mm,
many times, LuAnn, I mean now lately, I'm being very selective and we're talking about boundaries and like saying no and actually being picky. But again, this took 15 years to reach that point. But sometimes it's a matter of chemistry, right? Like
right.
you meet a client and the gut instinct is not there, the intuition is not there, and you're like, maybe I'm gonna go against the wall, like, I'm gonna hit a wall because if we don't get along, I'm gonna end up doing 20 revision because
Mm,
maybe I'm not gonna get what the client wants. So I think it's also important to put your foot down and say, I have to listen to my intuition rather than strictly finances. For us, this is really how we operate.
mm,
And yeah, I think one disadvantage, like in my case, is I had no financial knowledge, like, and I was
mm.
really a creative and an entrepreneur at heart. And nobody had taught me about, P&L and finances and cash flow. And the reality is this is major for a small company,
Yes.
right?
It's
So
80% of it,
I
right?
guess, like I failed massively 2 times, not in project, but into the
Mm,
finances and managing the team and, cash flow, because
mm.
too often I would want to do good and I work so much ahead of time without necessarily asking for a payment. And then guess what? The client doesn't pay. Also, I guess this is a very different aspect from the Middle East to the US is, you know, having 5 attorneys here is a bit useless when you're fighting against the most powerful people in the region. You know what I mean? What can you do as a 26, 27-year old if you're in front of the most powerful families in the region? Not
And
much,
they
I
can
can
just
guarantee.
like have
Yeah,
their lawyers do it for
yeah,
hours and hours and
yeah.
hours and run you in a circle. Right.
And
It's
destroy your
useless.
reputation on top of that,
Sure. Right,
So
right. All your referrals.
that's a
Right.
very big challenge. I would say like it was a big challenge. It always is a big challenge. So we've learned over the years, my advance payment is always 60% advance payment, on
Mhm,
any given project, So
mhm.
we're lucky enough now that, our clients trust us and, appoints us for overall projects, but it was not always the case, for the
Right,
past
right,
15 years.
right. Crazy, crazy. Now, your company now has offices in Dubai, Saudi Arabia, and Milan, right?
Correct, correct. In Italy,
And I
yes.
understand you have approximately 16 people on the team.
Correct.
Okay. And what you talked to me about was that you have architects on your team, interior designers, draftsmen, studio coordinators, project managers, your finance team, your
Yeah,
marketing team, and the business development team.
correct.
So tell me, where does Nina spend most of her time within these roles? Like, are there two or three areas that you sit in? Do you cross lots of them? Like what, like a company like this, what is your day to day, week to
So,
week, month to month?
I mean, I don't think I'm an example for anyone, but Nina is drowning on the work and is spread very, very thin. And I think it's the
Aw.
problem of many entrepreneurs that are leading small and medium enterprises, like as an SME, it's just, it's between, how do you do? You're not at the scale where you're going to hire a CFO and like, you don't have those funds necessarily. We're getting
Mhm.
there, so you're ending up, everywhere, right? So
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time. I'm still the head of design. I could say it this way, but as the year go by and as the team evolves more and more, they're also managing to do the whole customer relationship and understanding the client. I think my forte was always to get into the head of the client. So being head of design was always very important because, my designers, my architect and interior designer might design something and I would say, and I'd always tell them, please don't take it personally, but that client is going to hate that. And I'm not
Mm.
saying it from a personal point of view. I just put myself because I know the client so deeply, So
Yes.
a lot into design, a lot into detail, a lot also on site. So as I said, because we're doing turnkey project from A to Z, from design to execution. Of course, we have project manager in the team that their daily, let's
Every
say
day they're
scope
on site.
is, yeah, they're
Yeah.
on site and they follow up with contractors, suppliers. But as I said, you need to have a very, very strong personality, and unfortunately here, unless you're the boss, often they don't listen to you, so I always need to intervene. And there are instances. We just handed over a very, very luxurious penthouse here in, so the Bulgari hotel here in Dubai has residences that are very, very luxurious and has like two penthouses of the sort in Dubai. We just handed over one, and I ended up being on site 2 months straight every single day, because
Oh.
there was delays and the contractors were not exactly doing what we were asking them. So I had to personally be there. So it's challenging because you have a whole
So,
business to
yeah,
handle, right?
so let me ask you a question
Yeah.
about that. Are you saying that that is sort of a cultural thing where your projects are that, the contractors and the subs, if they don't want to do what's supposed to be done and it doesn't serve them because they're running behind or
Yeah.
whatever, that they're more likely to just ignore the orders from your project managers
Yeah.
and even for other companies,
Yeah.
that culturally,
Yeah.
it's like if the boss didn't say
Yeah.
it to their
Yeah.
eyeballs, they
Yes.
will
Yes.
ignore it.
We
That's
don't have
annoying.
that issue in Europe, for example. We have other
Okay.
issues. So see here in the Middle East, timelines are extremely fast. So we would do a project in a year. In Europe, it would take two. So because we see it, we
Ah,
have simultaneous project in Milan and in Dubai, right? So the problems are others. Like in Europe, I would say to the team, this is the lead, this is the project manager. Of course, that person reports to me, but I 200% trust them to manage the site, right? Here, the project manager might say something and it's not done. So I have to come, be very aggressive on site, and then it's going to get done, and harass people, really. However,
okay.
when it's there, then it's done very fast, so
I'm just
it's a
picturing you
cultural.
clackety clacking onto that
I mean,
site and just
it's
being like, "This is how
it's
it's gonna go."
oh, I mean, I don't know if you, I mean, on so we're very present on Instagram and on our social media, and we really, if people want to see what it looks like, we film day to day what's the behind the scene look like, because to me it's
Oh,
very important. Like I think design offices, sometimes you just see the glamorous aspect, but that's really the tip of the iceberg, right? Like
right.
the reality is not glamorous. Like I tell to whoever comes and interviews just to get a job in my office, I'm like, it's not pretty. It's
Yeah.
chaotic. It's hard. Your hands are in
Stressful.
the dirt, it's very, very stressful, so you're dealing with so many different culture, so the Middle East has the advantage and disadvantage of like having it's such a multicultural places. Like you have European, North American, Asian, in like very, very
All of it.
multinationality. So where you're on a project, you're dealing with people that are from, no exaggeration, 50 different cultures, 50 different background, so
Wow.
it's really like, when we work in Italy or in France, I know the French mindset, I know the Italian
Mm.
mindset, like I know the culture, I know how to behave with them, I know how to talk. But imagine dealing with 50 different culture. it is not an easy task. You have to, I think adaptability is a key word, and patience, like, so here, those are the challenges. But once it goes on, it goes on. It's very fast. Like people would work here 16, 17 hours a day, or would
Whoa.
work overnight, double shift. Nobody would do that in Europe,
And by the way, they shouldn't, right? Like people shouldn't work like
Yeah,
16 hours
no,
a
of
day.
course, but
But culturally, it's what
yeah, I
happens. And
mean,
that's
look,
that's a thing,
in
right?
in places like in Dubai right now is a place where it's becoming, the Monaco of the Middle East, right? You have
Mm,
a lot of wealthy people from all over the world doing extreme investments here, are expecting very high levels of property. Right now there are villas. I mean, this was unimaginable, 10 years ago. You have villas that sell for $100 million, which is insane to
gosh,
me. You know what I mean? So
that's
it's
nuts.
it became this crazy spectrum where the ultra rich, are moving, and of course the ultra rich and ultra wealthy need services. So
That's right.
it's becoming a very particular market, an interesting market nonetheless. But
Mm.
it's an interesting adventure.
Yeah, and it is, and it's just understanding how you have to swim in and out of the different types
Yeah.
of cultures. It's funny because a couple years ago I had a podcast with Mina Duque, who
Okay.
is Moroccan, had
Okay.
lived for a time in the U.S. and now lives in Tulum, Mexico.
Okay.
And as interest, her husband is the founder of Duke Renders, which is a
Okay.
rendering firm. And Mina, doing business as a designer in Mexico now,
Yeah.
was talking about the one of the distinct cultural differences that she had to learn and really work
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
was that if a contractor in Tulum says we're going to be here tomorrow morning,
It means
it's
after
like it means
tomorrow.
nothing.
Yeah.
It's like it could be 11, it could be
Yeah.
3 in the
So
afternoon, it could be tomorrow the
so
next day.
I guess South American have this commonality with Middle Eastern.
Oh,
It's
Middle East is that
maybe,
way too.
yes means maybe. You know what I mean? So it's there is no reliability, LuAnn, like at all. So
Oh,
for
that's so hard to run a firm
it's
like that.
so hard. It's like
Oh,
the like your anxiety when you're like goes up to the roof, because
oh,
on that last project, how many days I woke up screaming because I have to call the boss of the contractor. I have to call the driver to see if they've left the factory, if the 50 laborers have left. Like, it's calling myself the subcontractors that are working for the contractor to make sure they're there at 7:30 a.m. So it's like that, so
oh,
it's those to understand. So it's a lot of European or Americans or like that come here and that are used to structure and reliability are in deep shock, and so often they can't resist that. So I always say, for me, after working in the Middle East, because we're venturing out a bit, like, of course, in Europe, but I'm actually right now also looking at Australia. I know it sounds
uh,
crazy, but I'm also looking at Australia in terms of
actually, from you,
projects.
it sounds pretty normal.
Yeah, but for me, everything is so structured, and I'm like, after working in this environment, it feels like working anywhere else feels easy,
Wow.
because
Yeah.
my base was working on chaos, right? So it's like when you
Yes.
realize things are structured, you're like, wow,
Oh, I can breathe.
if a contractor or supplier gives me a lead time and respects it, I'm like, and clients actually pay, and you can actually sue the client if he doesn't pay.
That's crazy. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Now, do you mostly function as the rainmaker for your company, Nina, where you're the one that's networking and bringing in the clients and closing the deals?
Unfortunately, yes,
Yes.
yes. Yeah,
Well,
so
you would be the
I
best
mean,
person for that,
yeah, but
actually.
it's also hard because I think a lot of, again, office like mines is very, like, the person is the business, right? So I
Mm.
didn't reach the stage yet where I'm replaceable. I wish
Mhm.
I would be. You know what I mean? Like, I worry. I'm like, what if I'm on a plane crash? Like, what is I mean, God forbid, but I, like, last year I had an injury and I couldn't work for 2 weeks, and like that's still my reality, and that's still a massive challenge that I face as an entrepreneur. And we're
Mm.
we're starting to work on that. Is like, which team to build so it could be a bit less of me, but again,
Yeah.
it takes time because you need to reach a certain point of turnover as a design office to be able to hire that right hand that's senior enough, you know what I mean? So
Yes.
it's,
Yes.
you can't, where you're at a certain level, I just couldn't afford to hire, let's say, a project manager that's going to cost me $10,000 a month, because we were not there yet, so now we're
Mm-hmm.
at that stage where we're trying to see how I can detach a bit more, just to work more on business development and how we want the business to evolve, because I think it's a constant evolution, like I really feel a small business looks like a heartbeat monitor, like it's not a
Mm.
straight line, it's like
Right.
it's up and down, and it's like it's a roller coaster, I always say, and now I learned the answer, I always say, is it going to get calmer? And yes, it gets calmer for 6 months, but then something happens and it's like insanity, right? So, but
Right.
yeah, we are hardly now, one of our target this year is how can I be less in micromanagement, because this is right now I'm split between doing finances and working with the procurement team and overviewing design and being on site and, making sure our marketing is there and sending newsletter, and you know what I mean? So it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think you're right to know that it's something that should be on your plate.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like you had that situation where you were out for 2 weeks, and even it's going to be more like it's challenging, to your point, for any entrepreneur to build in that replaceability for
yeah,
themselves. And of course, we don't actually, until we're ready to sell a business, we don't actually need to be 100% replaceable, but we should be always
of course,
striving
of
for
course.
more ability to be replaceable. And I it's a challenge for any of us, but when you think about and you talk about how you don't get a reaction unless the owner
Yeah,
calls,
yeah,
that's going to be even tougher. It's
yeah.
almost like, I wonder how you'll have to deal with that, if you'll have to present somebody as a partner, or, I don't know,
So you
or they
basically
just
have
have to
to
be introduced from the
accept,
beginning.
it's very hard because you have to accept that maybe things are not going to go your way. So you have to
Mm.
accept that maybe mistakes are going to be made, and you have to willingly accept to let go. So that's
Yes,
why you
in
need to
order
be,
to build
yeah.
yourself in
And you need
replaceability.
to also, I
Absolutely.
would feel like you need a financial buffer at that time, because the reason why I react, and it's also time is money, right? So the reason
Yes.
why I need to get this done is because I don't want to pay penalty on a project. So, but
Right.
then I also have to make sure that somebody can step in my footstep and make sure that, well, if the contractor doesn't want to be responsive, you know, maybe if the project manager repeat and repeat after a week, maybe it's going to take a week instead of a day, but eventually
Right.
it will get there, so
Well, and you might
it's,
have to, for your business model, in that regard, that one slice of a trauma problem, you might have to have that person that's your right hand and that one
yeah,
starting be incentivized to
of
net
course,
profits,
of course, of
because
course.
now they have that same, no,
Yeah,
no, not a week a day. You know what I'm
like,
saying?
in fact, we are looking at a strategy for this year to, we had team members that were in the office for like 7, 8 years. So we have team members that have been here for a while, and we're looking at how to make sure they're ultra motivated. So we're looking again at,
Yes.
profit sharing. And so we're looking at this. And
Yes.
right now we're also looking at having our own project. So, the past year and a half, we've developed a lot of projects for our client. And I'm like, sorry, but the return on investment they have is so much higher compared to the money we make. So
Yeah.
I realized, I'm like, Nina, you have the skill, you've developed that skill, try to do it for yourself, because the reality is then, me to be able to get somebody really senior, like, then I'll be able to go hire somebody that's going to cost me $15,000 a month. But that's okay, because then, if I do my own project and raise the fund to do my own project, and I have a return on investment, like, just to give you an example, the last project we did is a project that, from an investment point of view, from buying the property and the work and the fit out that we've done, would be a project that costed around, $15 million. In a
Mm-hmm.
year, this project now worth $35 million. So
Whoa.
you could imagine the return on investment for the client. if he
Sure.
decides to sell, right? He had
Right.
2 offers in a week after handover from Sotheby's International, so, and then the next door penthouse that was refurbished was evaluated much lower. So I went to the client and I said, you know what? The difference of $10 million in valuation is us, is not the value of the property, is us. But it took me 15 years to, the imposter syndrome, like when you
Yeah.
start so
Yeah.
young, you don't realize it. And I think you don't see your self value. Like,
Yeah.
this was for me my biggest challenge. Like, it took me so long to put boundaries and to realize that what we offer is really valuable, and to just either put the right price tag on it, or to actually go and ask, if my client is doing this property for investment purposes, well, go and negotiate a percentage of the profit. Why not?
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
this would make us more comfortable as an office, because
Mm-hmm.
probably that small share of profit equal the whole fees that we took for a year to do that. It's not
Yes.
comparable, right? So
Yeah.
we're looking
Well,
into
I
this
think you have a
year. Yeah.
very straight line. I think you have a straight line to that. I mean, particularly in the situations when you're in some sort of penthouse, I mean, high-rise situation
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
one apartment is worth 15
Yeah.
million and then after you're done it's worth 35.
Yeah.
That's literally what's debatable about that. And
Yeah.
it's like, hey, give me 2% of
Yeah.
what it's
Yeah.
worth after I'm
Yeah.
done. Plus you
Yeah.
have to do the design fees because
Yeah.
what if
Of
they don't
course.
sell it?
Of
You have
course.
to do
Of
all
course.
that, but then you just say, and here's the little, vig on the end. And
Yeah.
there has to be a way to figure that out. And, my brain just went to there's probably some lawyer somewhere that's going to figure out that that's illegal. But, I don't know. You're going to figure that
I mean,
out.
things are a bit more flexible in the Middle East. Let's put it this way,
You have to watch this on YouTube. You have to see your face. She's like, well, I mean,
But yeah, I mean, we
that's
have to
funny.
find, like, I think, again, as a small and medium sized company, we have to constantly find ways to reinventing ourselves and to
Mm,
diversify, and to how can we become better, and how can
yeah.
we become more efficient and happier at what we do, because
Yes.
what we do is so hard, so energy consuming. And we need to see, like, I think one very important take for me, for your audience that might be younger and that is just getting into this, is work life balance. For me, I
Hmm.
feel I've sacrificed so much. And like, I don't think nobody like told me enough, Nina, really, the more you're gonna have a balance in your life, the better your job is gonna become. So it's,
Mm.
if you're exhausted, if you're burnt out, how can your creative brain function? Like,
No.
the past week, I have worked a lot and I've slept less than 7 hours a night. Well, guess what? I'm in the office and I have to do selection for a project.
And you
My
don't
brain
care.
cannot work as well. Like, match
Right.
this fabric with this fabric and this finish with this finish is just, is
It's
not
like
right. Like,
whatever.
you're
Right.
still a creative, so it's like, for
Yeah.
me, where I still am and where I still see myself is the creative aspect, because this is what I love to do, and this is
Yes.
who I was since I was a kid, so this is very important to me, and not to lose that aspect of being a creative against being an entrepreneur, and against the everyday worries of a business, from
Mm.
the financial challenges to, handover challenges to client management, again, 2%
Mhm.
high net worth individual, that is very difficult to manage.
Yeah, I can imagine. Before I let you go, I want to go back. You just brought it up from being creative as a child. When you said, as a very young toddler, you knew you wanted to be
Yeah.
an architect, what was the exposure? Was there someone in your family that was like, how would even a 2 or 3, 4
I
year old
mean,
even know
look,
what an architect is?
I think growing up in France and in Paris is already an advantage, right? So
Okay. So
I
just surrounded
I
by
think
the
I
history of
I
the buildings.
always get asked this question, is creativity innate? And I
Mm.
do think that creativity and aesthetics is can be an innate talent, but it's something that definitely you develop. So I grew up surrounded, like, I grew up in a historical city. I grew up, traveling a lot. So my mom always made it a point for us to travel every 6 weeks. So I think by the age of 15, I had really traveled the world, so I was very
Wow.
independent, had seen, being Persian originally, we have a lot of families in the US, a lot of families all over Europe. So I had seen, Middle East, Asia, US. So it's, you get exposed to so many urban, I would say, urban differences, so you feel cities, so for me, I was very sensitive to that. Like, even as a
Mm.
kid, I would never get lost. I had such a sense of orientation and seeing buildings. And so I think it was around me. My aunt was also an architect. Like, we have a few architects in the
Oh,
family, but
nice.
my parents are purely scientists. My mom has a PhD in mathematics, my dad in physics and chemistry. So they're scientists. So I was
You're like the
really,
Curies from
yeah,
France.
like the
Marie Curie and the
actually,
rest of them.
my mom, her nickname is Marie Curie, so it's
See?
funny. It's
Yeah.
funny you say that. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I think I was surrounded by it, so that was a big
Mm.
chance, growing up in Paris, like the capital of historical architecture,
Mm.
but then again, having really a passion for it. So I was,
Mm.
in art school since the age of like 8, 9. Like,
Mm.
I was very advanced. Like, I would do sculptures, drawings. I would spend my weekend in the Louvre Museum.
Wow.
So I guess I had that in me. So, and all over the years, it developed. And really, at home, I was like, I would choose everything. So from a very young age. So
Well, your mother and father being in science and math, they're like, whatever. We don't
yeah.
care. Pick whatever color you
Oh
want,
yeah,
sweetie. It'll be
they're
fine.
calling me the space dictator, and I'm very sensitive to that. Even today, for me, spaces are the most important. Like, I cannot sleep in a bad space. Like, for me, wherever
Mm.
I go, wherever I travel, I am so sensitive to spaces. Like, I am so sensitive to a bad lighting design, so
Mm.
for me, spaces are places that are, so I'm not really into skyscrapers, and like, I like human scale, because I think we
Mm.
design for people, right? So,
Yeah.
and whereas I graduated as an architect, I'm against boundaries into design, so France is very, boxy. Europe is very boxy. You're either an architect or an interior designer or an industrial designer or a lighting designer. And I never believed in this. I always
Oh.
believe that you need to, it's as important to know how to design a chair than choosing the tassel for the chair, and also knowing about structure, so I think this was my
Right.
deep interest. Yeah.
Interesting. It's
Yeah.
so interesting. My goodness, what an amazing career. And of
Thank
course, you're
you.
really just on the tip of it here, even 15 years in or
Thank you.
whatever it is. You've got so much ahead of you.
Thanks.
And I agree with you. Before you go, I have to just reiterate your own words. You do need to build in the structure in your team
Yeah,
so that you can be able
absolutely.
to step away for
Yeah,
pleasure or for
yeah,
challenges,
yeah,
so that, you don't do all this for nothing and it falls
yeah.
apart, right? Like a house of cards, right?
Well, we can reconnect in 1 year and I'll give you the
Yes.
conclusion of where we're
Let's
at.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Nina, so much for being here and sharing your story with me. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, LuAnn, for having me and for giving me the chance to tell my story.
All right. So, can we just say for a moment how impressive Nina is? I mean, right? She's clearly determined, clearly driven, and a hashtag smart lady. The way she talks about her experience being a woman working in the Middle East, which has ended up benefiting and serving her. Though the thing is, the way she talks about it, it's a reflection of her personality. This viewpoint is the way she processes and perceives the world, which is, I'm someone who can get things done, right? I love that. And I love that she dove into her first project, knowing that somehow, some way, she'd figure it out and bring it all together. However, there's more to Nina's success than just being driven. She's also strategic. That insight that she had early on about what the other big global design companies were doing and what they weren't doing. She understood the culture, the market, and the realities of what her clients needed. And because she had the courage to say this to them and to put this forward, it created the opportunity for her. Okay. I'm sure that Nina has battled her fair share of imposter syndrome. None of us escapes it. But she's has these moments where she pushes through with courage and confidence and she creates the things that she can see on the other side of it. I love that. I want you to take encouragement from that. I also want to highlight the part of the conversation where we talked about her on that first project essentially delivering so much before she had even a deal signed or guaranteed payment, right? You know that in 80, 90 95% of the cases, you ask me point blank, should you do that? I'm probably going to say on face value, no. But we always have to listen to our inside voice. She knew that what she could do was different than everybody else, and that she knew she needed to show it in order to set herself apart. If she hadn't done that, it might have been much harder for her to tap into this market. And what I want you to know is you got to follow the rules until you don't follow the rules. You have to listen to your inside voice. You see, the big difference between that situation and undervaluing yourself or offering unpaid work when you shouldn't comes down to listening to your inside voice. She knew what she was risking. She knew what she could potentially gain. And she had that gut instinct that this was the way to go after it. Okay, but here's the thing. There are many times that our inside voice is telling us not to do the thing. And then you talk yourself into it because, oh, this or that or whatever. In these cases, you are doing the opposite. You are shutting down your inside voice. And the result is that you get this feeling that you're being taken advantage of, or you don't feel excited about the project, or you end up with a negative viewpoint of the client. This is the nuance worth considering. I'm all about charging your worth, not working for free, and for positioning yourself as a professional and an expert from the get-go. But strategically understanding rewards and reasons that are not always money earned today, but benefits and opportunities you're creating for later, that's a different story. And you know the difference if you listen to your inside voice, I promise you. Now, without any course correction, though, it ended up backfiring on Nina at some point, right? Which then led her to establish that 60% upfront policy. Okay. The thing is, I can't say she made the mistake on the first project. I'm not saying that. I'm agreeing with what she did on the first project. The mistake or the misstep was not recognizing after creating the first opportunity, then she needed to course correct and set the table for going forward. Okay, so we can do something in order to make an impression. We can do something in order to get a specific gain. We just don't keep doing it for no reason down the line. Okay, and Nina has figured this out, of course. There are so many elements here that have helped Nina thrive, including the idea of always knowing what's next, the big trends and the demands, what your clients are looking for and what they don't even know they're looking for. If you can find a way to do this in your business like Nina, then you can charge more. You can walk with confidence, and you can know that you're bringing a high level of value to the table. Now, we learned from Nina that her big challenge is finding a way to cultivate the team so that they can really run the ship and she can pull herself back to be that CEO, right? She also needs and wants to work on gaining some work-life balance, right? And not to feel like she's scrambling in the weeds all the time. It's something that's so common, even for the savviest, most strategic of us business owners. We take so much pride in ownership in what we do that it's hard to imagine letting go. And I think it's even harder for someone like Nina, who truly does have multiple areas of strength, okay? From understanding the client on a deep level, to being a creative lead, to being able to tap into the cultural differences, so it's not going to be easy for any of us, and least of all Nina, to do this, but creating a team that you can lead and lead well is always worthwhile, right? It reminds me of my recent conversation with Tim Urich on my other podcast, Window Treatments for Profit. He and I discussed the importance of succession planning as well as cultivating a culture that speaks to the most valuable people on your team, going beyond cookie cutter benefits packages for especially your most valuable team members. It's about identifying the people that matter, taking the time to sit down, have real conversations with them, and learn what matters most to them, and then offering ways to reward them and incentivize them through the things that matter to them. Everybody has different priorities. For some, it might be a retirement package. For others, it's how to pay for their college for their kids in a couple of years down the road. For others, it's the ability to be present with their families with a flexible schedule. And sometimes, we offer people things that they don't even want, and we wonder why they're not happy. right? It's like constantly your husband brings you home, vanilla ice cream every night. And you're like, I like chocolate. What's so hard to understand about this? Well, I stopped and got you ice cream. Shouldn't you be grateful? I guess. Right? So it's the same with our employees. Don't just do things that make you feel good. Try and do things that make them feel good. And this will be, the next step, I think, for Nina and for many of us as we build our businesses. And we'll link that conversation with Tim in the show notes. All right. Now, before we end, I want to talk about one more takeaway. Nina knew from the age of 3 what she wanted to do, which is kind of mind-blowing in a way, right? But she felt the drive early to create, and it raises a good question. What is it? Is creativity innate? Are some of us just born with this natural creative talent and others are not? Or is it a learned skill that some of us just develop earlier but anybody can cultivate it and create it in themselves? It's a complicated question, and one that I am going to dig deep into in one of my upcoming Overheard episodes. It will be a conversation featuring Layden Lewis, Charles Pavarini, and Maria Viola. So if this is a question that you've wondered, keep your eyes peeled for that upcoming episode. If you've connected with Nina's story because of the global aspect or are interested in what it takes to launch a firm in a different country or work with clients of a variety of cultures, I also recommend that you listen to Mina Duque's episode 639. Okay, Mina is an interior designer in Mexico, and she talked about having not been raised in Mexico, some of the challenges that she faces doing business there. Mina is also the husband of Fernando Duque, who is the CEO of Duke Renders, and we will link their episodes in the show notes. Thank you, Nina, so much for sharing your story. I appreciate it. It was so interesting. It will be interesting to see how you continue and grow and develop. All right, and thank you for listening. I appreciate it so much. Decide to be excellent. Thank you for joining me today. This podcast is a production of LuAnn Nigara, Inc. If you want to know more about me, my books, or LuAnn University, go to LuAnnNigara.com. And if you are interested in having WindowWorks help you with your next window treatment or awning project in the New York, New Jersey metro area, go to WindowWorksNJ.com to learn more. Have an excellent day.